Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Inclusive Community Solar Adder webinar. We're going to be giving people just a few more minutes to log in since it's right at 1 o'clock. Thank you very much for your patience. Hi, everyone. I can see that people are still logging into the webinar, so we're going to give it just another minute before we kick off. Thank you very much. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the New York Sun Inclusive Community Solar Adder webinar. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. My name is Max Joel. I am the Assistant Director for the New York Sun program at NYSERDA, and I'm joined on today's call by a number of my colleagues, probably too many to introduce right off the bat, but the bulk of today's webinar will be delivered by Sarah Jayanthi, who I'll introduce in just a minute. And then myself and my colleagues will be participating in the Q&A at the end of the webinar. Next slide, please. So before we get started, a little bit of housekeeping. First and foremost, today's webinar is being recorded, and a copy of the slides will be made available on our webpage. We'll also be sending out an email to all attendees with the link to the slides and the recording. Everyone will be muted during the webinar, and we'd like you to submit your questions in writing using the Q&A feature. Go ahead and submit that at any time, but we will hold all the responses for the end. So what we'll be doing is delivering a presentation, then pausing for a few minutes while we sort of process those questions, and then jumping back in to address them. We do have 90 minutes in total today, so we do anticipate having time to address a large number of questions. Finally, if you do have technical problems during the webinar, please contact my colleague Dylan Cunningham at his email is up on the screen, dylan.cunningham@nyserda.ny.gov for assistance. And before we leave this slide, since people continue to come in, I'll just note again, the webinar is being recorded. A copy will be made available to all attendees and to the public on our website. Next slide, please. And before I hand it over to Sarah and we launch into the main presentation, which will be about the Inclusive Community Solar Adder, I did want to go over some of the next steps since that's often a question people have on these webinars. So after this webinar, actually, rather before this webinar, the sort of written version of the content of this webinar, the new revision of the proposed round two inclusive community solar adder program design was sent out via email. That will all be posted online as well. Um, so what we're hoping is that people will attend this webinar, ask questions here, review the written program design, and then provide us with one last round of feedback. So what we ask is for written feedback to be submitted by April 11th to the community solar email address. And we'd also love to have direct phone calls to get feedback one-on-one. Please email again Dylan Cunningham to set up a time to meet with the team. We received a lot of extremely valuable stakeholder feedback after our first round last year. I think you'll see a lot of that incorporated into the design we present today. This is a really important part of the process, and I really encourage everyone to keep on participating. So before I leave this slide, I do want to give sort of an important point of context and announcement. Of course, many of the participants on this call um, are familiar with the community adder as well as the inclusive community solar adder. The two are really paired together. And I know there have been a lot of questions while the community adder has been paused over the last couple of months. We are going to be releasing the community adder before the ICSA. We expect to have the community adder reopened by mid-April, and it will be reopened at the same incentive rates as the previous blocks. So 7 cents a watt in upstate and 20 cents a watt in Con Ed. We'll be sending out emails with more details about block size and timing and all that, but wanted to let everyone on this call know that so they could have that in mind while they hear about the inclusive community solar adder today. And finally, before I introduce Sarah Jayanthi, I will say one more time, this webinar is being recorded. The recording and the slides will be made available via email and online. And with that final reminder, I'll hand it over to Sarah to move us through the proposed program design.
Great. Thank you so much, Max. Good afternoon, everybody. So as Max mentioned, my name is Sarah Jayanthi, and I'm here to talk about the Inclusive Community Solar Adder version 2 of the ICSA round 2 rules. Just try to say that 5 times fast. As Max also mentioned, we emailed those rules this morning to stakeholders that are signed up to our email list. I believe my colleague Dylan has also dropped that link into the Q&A. So if you did not receive that email, there is a link to that you can look at. So to provide some background, as I mentioned, this is version 2.0 of those draft program rules of the Inclusive Community Solar Adder. We actually released the first version of the draft rules in August of 2022, and of course that was around the same time of the passage of the Inflation Reduction Act. We decided to pause the release of the ICSA because we heard, as with the rest of the industry, that the U.S. Department of Treasury would issue their guidance on the bonus ITC component, sometime early 2023. We know that guidance was issued by Treasury in February, and we based on the information that we got, it was a little bit limited, but they also indicated that further guidance would come out in Q3 2023. So, we really decided that there was no reason to continue to delay the release of the ICSA. And so this version of the proposed program rules that you're about to see, what we're calling version 2.0, takes into consideration that initial guidance that we all saw in February, but it also takes into consideration, and we made adjustments to the rules based on the feedback that we received from our stakeholders in the fall. So the stakeholders that did respond to that original version of the rules in August, that feedback has definitely been incorporated into this document. So how the presentation is going to go today is that we are only going to be showing the sections of the ICSA program rules that we have updated. So there's a lot from the August 2022 program rules that we are keeping. We didn't get extensive feedback or everybody was happy with those changes that we made. So those rules are just going to be in an appendix at the end of this slide. And what we're only going to be talking about are the changes that we made between that August 2022 draft and this current draft, which we're calling version 2.0. And you'll be able to see that appendix once we post the slides on our resources for contractors page. So next slide, John. So the round 2 program design changes. We can go to the next slide. So to kick things off, we'll just go right into the Inflation Reduction Act. So based on the guidance that we received in February and the fact that a greater level of detail is going to be coming to us in the next Q3 2023, NYSERDA is going to just be adding to the program rules that we reserve the right to cancel or adjust the ICSA award if a project does receive the bonus ITC. Um, you know, it's really unclear at this time how many projects will actually be able to secure the bonus ITC. We do encourage that all projects apply because, this is a good funding opportunity that's being provided by the federal government. But what NYSERDA has to consider is really written in the blue section of this slide, which is that we need to make sure that we're maximally leveraging those federal funds to benefit New Yorkers, especially the New Yorkers that we are trying to serve with the ICSA, which are New Yorkers and underserved communities. And so if a project gets the ITC, there's an opportunity that some or all of the ICSA funding that project could have gotten, it would be great for that funding to then go on to support other solar projects that can further create greater benefit to underserved communities. So that's something that we definitely want to be able to consider, and that's why we've put in this additional language. I will just say that no decisions have been made around this. We don't have that much detail. We have the same level of detail that I think everybody else does in terms of what is happening at the federal level. So NYSERDA will just be adding further details to this as the additional federal guidance is released. I'm sure there are a lot of questions that are going to come in around this specific topic. That's why we wanted to do it at the very beginning and just get it out of the way. So just please throw your questions into the Q&A function and we can talk about them during the Q&A section. So with that, next slide. So with the Inflation Reduction Act in mind, let's just move on to talking about the incentive rates. So, given what I just said around the bonus ITC, what NYSERDA is going to do for this next round of the ICSA, for round 2 of the ICSA, is we're proposing to just move forward with the adder amounts that we proposed in August. So, for example, for the upstate rates, for projects that receive the megawatt block or community adder, they would get a 10 cents a watt for their ICSA portion. If an upstate project received phase 1 NEM, market transition credit, or community credit, they would receive 5 cents a watt. The only difference here, and the reason why we're presenting it in this part of the presentation, is that additional language that I had mentioned in the previous slide, that NYSERDA may make adjustments if a project receives the bonus ITC. But again, we will add those further details as additional federal guidance is released. So next slide. And so that ITC language also applies to any community benefit projects. So community benefit projects are 20 cents a watt, and then also for community adder, and then also 15 cents a watt if they are receiving phase 1 NEM, the market transition credit, or community credit. Actually, can you go back to the first slide? Sorry about that. I just realized I missed something. The other thing that I wanted to point out that I jumped over in my notes is that the initial capacity block for the ICSA for upstate projects will be 860 megawatts. So I just wanted to note that. So let's move on to the next and the next slide after that. Okay. So for the Con Ed territory, similar to Upstate, we're going to be moving forward with those incentives that we proposed in August 2022. So for a Con Ed CDG project that's just doing a traditional ICSA, they would get 30 cents a watt. We are also moving forward with the required discount of 15%. And then if a project decides that they want to be a community benefit project, if they're going to provide that greater value to the customer, um, they would get a higher incentive of 40 cents a watt. So, uh, and again, as I said before, we have added the bonus ITC language also to the Con Ed incentive levels. Next slide. So the next section that we're going to talk about is the adjustments that we're making to community benefit projects based on the feedback that we received. So as a reminder to everybody, community benefit projects it's basically an added incentive for projects that can receive, or sorry, let me start over. So community benefit projects are projects that can receive a higher incentive if they provide their customers with a higher minimum bill discount, incorporate measures that increase access to community solar, and demonstrate a greater commitment to subscribers and their surrounding communities. So in the rules that we proposed in August, we made it a requirement that for projects to be designated as community benefit projects, they must provide a 20% bill discount. So we actually got some feedback from stakeholders around this specific component of the community benefit project, specifically from community organizations and climate justice advocates, just to reconsider or have more flexibility around the bill discount as projects that robustly serve their communities, either through local hiring, community ownership, deep community engagement, and partnership through the process, could provide greater in-kind value beyond just that bill discount. So we agreed, to provide a little bit more flexibility there. And so we're now offering two options for projects to qualify as community benefit projects. So option one is the original option, which is a project must have a 20% bill discount and meet 3 of the 5 criteria that we list in the program rules. And then option two is that if a project is able to meet all 5 of the criteria that are listed in the program rules, then they only need to provide a 15% bill discount. So we're just trying to make sure that at the end of the day, we do see a greater commitment coming from these types of projects, but providing a little bit more flexibility on the bill discount. Next slide. The other changes that we made to community benefit projects is around that criteria. So the criteria are staying the same, but we did see a lot of questions kind of around just getting greater clarification, specifically on what defines a close relationship with a community partner. So we did provide greater clarification on what we want to see there in the version 2.0 document. The other thing that I wanted to get additional feedback on was that in the stakeholder feedback in the fall, we did hear from stakeholders that they wanted NYSERDA to consider workforce development activities kind of beyond what we had listed as eligible. So we require doing specific workforce development programs that NYSERDA already has in place. And if you do those, then those would qualify under the community benefit project criteria. And the reason why we did that is that we at New York Sun are not workforce development experts. That's why we're partnering with our colleagues on that team on this. But we are open to looking at this again. So if you did provide comments on that, just help us understand specifically what activities you're talking about that you think should qualify as a workforce development activities, and also help NYSERDA in talking about how NYSERDA could verify participation and the impact. So that's where we got a lot of really good feedback, but not really, for us to be able to actually build that into the program rules, we just needed a little bit more detail. So Next slide, please. Okay, so the next slide is around the changes and the additional feedback we'd love around categorical eligibility. So we got a lot of feedback around the fact that we were offering for if projects wanted to do categorical eligibility, that they could use the affordable solar documentation process to retain or send in backup documentation. So I think there was some confusion that maybe folks thought that this is now the way that categorical eligibility is going to work. It was just an option. So the way categorical eligibility works is that you're collecting like SNAP award letters or HEAP award letters. There are other types of documentation we list. If a provider doesn't want to keep that stuff in-house, this was just an alternative that companies could just work with NYSERDA to store that information that way. So not required, just an alternative. Um, the specific feedback that we wanted on categorical eligibility was really on the ability to expand what is listed as acceptable documentation. So we've gotten a lot of comments on, including Section 8 vouchers and Medicaid and other assistance programs that are not listed in the program rules. So we're actually using a list that was developed by NYSERDA's single family residential team. They really are the in-house experts on customer level eligibility documentation. So if you want us to consider other types of documentation, please share that feedback. Also, please share like what other analogous programs might do it. I think I've gotten some notes already that, Maryland is doing this, Delaware is doing that. That really helps us in a big way. We can share that with the single family residential team and see if we can expand on that list. So next slide, please. I just want to make sure everybody can hear me and we're going good before I keep going. I just noticed. I'm assuming yes, so I'll keep going.
All good, Sarah.
All right, thank you, Dylan. So now let's talk about geo-eligibility. The big update here and the reason why it's on this section of the presentation is we just wanted to make sure everybody knew that we are going to move forward with the update that subscriber can be considered ICSA eligible if they reside in a disadvantaged community as defined by kind of the final disadvantaged community criteria, also known as the final DAC criteria. And because of the way that the DAC criteria has been developed, these customers can be listed as geo eligible, or they can be they can be listed as geo eligible, and there is no need to have those customers fill out a self-attestation form. So very exciting update. I think it's going to create a lot more efficiency for folks in their acquisition process. I will say that this option is only available for round 2 projects, and I'll go through kind of more detail around that specific comment. We also got some feedback from actually quite a few stakeholders asking for NYSERDA to allow for self-attestation outside of geo-eligibility. So if a customer lives outside of a geo-eligibility zone, just having them sign a self-attestation form attesting that they're eligible for the program. We did think about this. We just don't see a feasible way on how to do this and ensure that the customers that sign the self-attestation forms are in fact eligible. So we're not going to be doing that for the ICSA, but I did want to acknowledge that that was a piece of feedback that we received, and that was our decision around it. Of course, as with anything, you can provide us feedback on that specific decision. Next slide, please. So moving on to the affordable housing property eligibility, we got a lot of feedback on our affordable housing property rules and how to demonstrate that a property is eligible. So what we've actually done with version 2.0 is we've added a lot more guidance to help providers and contractors just better understand what makes for a qualifying affordable housing property. So all the required kind of allowed documentation is now right in the program rules, and we've specified what we need to see on the documentation to confirm eligibility. We saw we heard in conversations and also just, saw firsthand that um, you know, community solar developers aren't necessarily experts in affordable housing. So we're trying to kind of bridge that gap a little bit. And, we're hoping that additional guidance is helpful. So, please look at that updated section and let us know kind of what you think there. So the next slide, please. And the other component I wanted to talk about around an update for the affordable housing section is around the master metered affordable housing. So we actually didn't get a ton of feedback on this specific part of the program rules, and I wanted to kind of elevate the importance of it and to have stakeholders like look at it and provide some guidance. We wrote kind of the master metered affordable housing property eligibility rules, and I think that although we've written them, we think that they're pretty detailed. We're still seeing questions from providers that I think demonstrate that there's some confusion there. So our request is to look at it again and to provide additional guidance. We just want to make sure that you don't miss this part of it. Next slide, please. So moving on, we're going to be talking about where we've made some updates to the application process for the ICSA. And we've only made a handful of adjustments, but I think they're important to talk about on this webinar. The first one is not an adjustment, but actually a request for additional feedback. So we have a requirement in the program rules to see the contractual agreement between the primary contractor and the subscription provider to confirm that they're working together. We did receive comments about this that, there's of course concern with sharing this information. From NYSERDA's perspective, we really don't see another way to be able to confirm the project team is locked in and that there is maturity in the acquisition planning. What we're trying to prevent is something that we saw in round one, where we would get ICSA applications and 3 or 4 possibilities of subscription providers were provided, but there wasn't a real decision of who was actually going to do the acquisition, which I think we need to see more maturity kind of in the acquisition planning before applying for the ICSA. So if you think that there's another way that this can be done without sharing any kind of contractual agreement, we're very much open for that. But we need to have some other options before we change kind of this rule that we have put in place. So next slide, please. So we also received some feedback about the new requirement to do a video screen capture of the customer journey that a customer experiences as they sign up for community solar. I just wanted to reiterate that we're actually going to move forward with this proposed design and wanted to give folks on the presentation just some context about why. It's really important for ICSA to understand a customer's journey because, we need to ensure that the customer does have a clear understanding of what they're signing up for, and that is part of the customer journey when they sign up. So in round one ICSA applications, it was really difficult to discern that, and we actually asked some providers to do walkthroughs of their customer journey as part of their application process. That didn't seem like a heavy lift for them. It was also very helpful for NYSERDA in assessing the applications, and so that's why we're making it a requirement going forward. Okay, next slide. Okay, the next 2 slides are actually about door-to-door sales. So as many stakeholders on the call might remember, NYSERDA did propose a ban on door-to-door sales in the August 2022 draft of the round 2 rules. We got a good amount of constructive feedback from the industry on this ban. And with this feedback, solutions on how to ensure a better customer experience. So for the round 2 of the ICSA, we will not be banning door-to-door sales. However, we are going to allow select providers to do door-to-door sales if they're able to meet a new set of criteria that we've outlined below. Number one, the contractor and customer acquisition provider must be in good standing with DPS. Number two, the project's customer acquisition team needs to have a system in place that will easily identify which sales associates or subcontractors, however you structure your door-to-door sales team, are in the field and at one time so that it's possible to determine responsibility in the event of a customer complaint. What we mean by this is, if we get a customer complaint and we know where that customer lives, we need to be able to identify who was in the field and the company that they worked for. Three, if a customer signs up online or with a paper application, a signature must be collected and a copy of that signature must be stored for at least 5 years. Number four, if a customer signs up via door-to-door or over the phone, the customer acquisition team is required to call the customer after that interaction and get a verbal confirmation of the customer's interest in the community solar product that they signed up for. And the recording of that call must be stored for 5 years, for at least 5 years. And then, next slide. Great. So I just talked about the phone call if a customer's signed up via door-to-door over the phone, so that is there. And then the last component of this is that the customer acquisition provider and all subcontractors must be listed in the application, in the ICSA application. And when I say subcontractors, I mean all the subcontractors working in the field. If the contractors to change, those updates must be submitted to NYSERDA before the new subcontractor comes on board. So I'm sure there's going to be, I'll just finally say that failure to adhere to these requirements, as always, may result in some changes to the award or rejecting invoices. So we really want to, this new set of rules is very, very important. As I said, I'm sure there are quite a few questions about this because this is a really big change from the last set of rules. So please put them in the Q&A function. We'll address them during Q&A. All right, next slide, please. The next slide is about the new requirement, which is around project changes. So in the draft that we shared in August, we introduced that a contractor is required to notify NYSERDA if changes occur after an application is approved. We got some good feedback here asking for greater specificity and clarity around the project changes requirement. So we did put some greater clarity here, and we did specify specifically, what changes NYSERDA needs to be notified about. So change in acquisition provider, change in subscription manager, change to terms of the customer subscription contract or CDG disclosure form, if your outreach strategy changes from what was listed in the application, and if the eligible subscriber target mix differs from what was listed in the application. Really changes that might have an impact on the customer. That's what we're really focused on here. And those would now be submitted through a request for change process in the NYSERDA portal. Okay, next slide. So this next slide is actually a brand new rule that was not in the August 2022 draft. In this fall, we actually got a lot of questions about whether round one projects could use the new modified, more streamlined eligible subscriber criteria. So the streamlined geo eligibility criteria, the expanded categorical eligibility, and the affordable housing criteria. So what we're proposing in version 2.0 is that round one projects can use the round two eligibility criteria, provided that they agree to additional terms that round one projects are currently not subject to. So number one, they need to comply with the additional criteria required to perform door-to-door sales. Number two, they need to adhere to requirements around the long-term subscriber makeup, which I will talk about later. And number three, they need to adhere to any adjustments that round two projects are subject to if they receive the bonus ITC. So, for example, if a round one project wants to do geo eligibility without self-attestation, they need to comply with these additional terms. And this slide and also the program rules lays out the process that we've put in place if a project does want to do that. Again, if you have questions about this, send them over to the Q&A. We are almost done, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. Next slide, please. So this slide is about the ICSA funding amount and how we're structuring the funding. So we are going to move forward with how the projects are going to be awarded. So to jog everyone's memory, if a project is approved to receive the ICSA, they will be contracted at a subscriber target range of 40 to 60%. And the funding amount on the award letter will be calculated as the incentive rate multiplied by 60% of that project's total capacity. So if a project does end up signing up more than 60% of their capacity to subscribers, so if they are able to, fill their project with 70% customers or 80% customers, that additional capacity will be eligible to receive additional dollars, and those dollars will be pulled from a separate fund. So we are moving forward with this, and I wanted to take a moment to just talk about this because we did receive feedback, specifically projects expressing concern about the uncertainty of, if they will receive funds if they sign up more than 60% of their project to eligible subscribers. And just to provide clarity and context around why we did this, we really designed this part of the program so that there was flexibility for the project teams. What we're seeing as the invoices come in is that what a project proposes versus what they're actually able to accomplish can vary greatly, both on they might do much better than they anticipated, or they might actually do not as well as they anticipated. So, what this structure means is that, for example, if you project that you will fill 80% of your project with ICSA customers, but you only fill 50% of your project, there's no penalty. So it allows for more flexibility in the end for these projects. And for the questions around transparency, we are going to have a dashboard on the New York Sun website that shows what funds are available kind of in this separate fund. So we will be transparent on the money that is available for projects that are able to get more than 60% of their project filled with ICSA customers. Okay. Next slide, please. So the next slide is also brand new. It's a brand new rule that wasn't in the August 2022 draft. And this is about actually how the invoicing process is going to work going forward. So currently, if a project is ready to apply for the ICSA, they are submitting all of their subscriber documentation. So their allocation form, host summary reports, submission template at the same time as their invoice. What we're learning is that this process is actually pretty inefficient because, many times the deliverables will come in at different stages, and, it would probably be more helpful to have those submitted at the time that they're ready versus waiting for everything to come in at the same time. So what we're going to do moving forward is that projects will be required to submit and have their subscriber documentation approved prior to submitting invoices. And it means that, once the subscriber documentation is approved, invoicing can just be really quick. So we're just separating out those two processes versus having them kind of all bundled together. And then finally, next slide. Our last slide is around this concept known as the long-term subscriber composition, which we originally had called the record-keeping requirement in the rules that we released in August. So, we got a good amount of feedback on this, and I think the concern that we heard was around maintaining the subscriber percentages and the bill discounts long-term for the ICSA subscribers. We are moving forward with this proposal, but we wanted to provide greater detail and clarity on what this requirement now is. Hopefully that will reduce a lot of confusion that we saw in the comments. So I think the way to think about this requirement is that this requirement already exists for the community adder. So projects that receive the community adder have to stay community solar projects for a certain amount of time. I think it's also 25 years. And if they decide to reconfigure, they have to return a portion of the community adder. So we're essentially doing the same thing for the ICSA. It has to be the same bill discount just for those ICSA customers and the same percentage of the customers that as what you were able to maintain within the first 3 years of the program. The way that we are going to monitor this is we're going to conduct random audits of ICSA projects after that initial award period. So if a project is selected to be audited, they will have 45 days to give us the documentation to confirm that their subscriber makeup and their bill discount is consistent. And we will have a ability to adjust after that point. So it's not like you'll get penalized. It's like we request the information. We need that information within 45 days, and then there will be an opportunity to adjust if you want to keep your ICSA. And I just wanted to clarify that much like the community adder, projects are allowed to reconfigure, but if they do, they have to give up a portion of their ICSA. If a project reconfigures and they don't tell NYSERDA and we find it out through the audit process, the project may be penalized and there might be, and there are greater details for those penalties in the program rules. So on that note, I think we are done with the presenting portion of today's program. So let's quickly talk about the stakeholder feedback again that Max had mentioned at the very beginning. So next slide again, John, thank you. So as I said, this is the slide that Max presented this information earlier. We will be accepting feedback two different ways. Number one, there's written feedback. You can email the Community Solar inbox and use the subject line that we indicate here. We do ask you to use the subject line because if you don't use it, then we might lose your feedback, and we want to make sure we're collecting everybody's feedback. All emails must be sent by April 11th at 3 p.m. And then finally, we are also giving stakeholders an opportunity to provide us feedback via phone. And if you want to just talk to us on the phone and provide your feedback that way, just email Dylan Cunningham to set up a time. And he just needs to be emailed at least 72 hours in advance prior to when you want to have that call. And then finally, just reiterating what Max said before, which is that the community adder will be released before the ICSA. I think more details on that are forthcoming. And with that, next slide, we are ready for the Q&A. I'm going to take a water break, and I'm just going to kick it over to Max. If Max, you want to start the Q&A process.
Thanks so much, Sarah. Yes, I'll kick it off with taking some of the early questions that came in about the community adder and other topics while Sarah takes a water break and reviews more of the questions that came in about her presentation. Um, just to get into a little more detail about the community adder, the block size, the new block size for upstate would be 800 megawatts. That will include projects that CDG projects that have been submitted since the last block ran out. And that was another question. Would the community adder be retroactively applied to the significant number, I think 50 plus CDG projects that have come in since that last block ran out? The answer there is definitely yes. All those projects will be treated, essentially just the same as if there'd been an immediate transition to the new community adder. What that means, however, is that of that 800 megawatt block, depending on timing, roughly half might be taken up by what is already in the pipeline, leaving, very roughly half available for future projects within this block. On the Con Ed side, we plan to simply reopen the 100 megawatt block that had been open until we paused it. There was plenty of capacity left in there. We are, just going to be double checking projects because there is, ongoing community credit recycling for the time being in Con Ed. So we'll just confirm how many of those pipeline projects are still eligible for the community adder. Moving on down, other community adder questions. Oh, so a question about not community solar, just a question is remote crediting still going to be allowed? The answer is very much yes. This presentation and the ICSA is all about community solar, and of course the community adder is for community solar. But remote crediting projects are absolutely still eligible for the base New York Sun adder, whether that's the base New York Sun incentive, whether in the Con Edison territory, that will vary depending on the system size. In the upstate utility territories, that will also vary based on size. But for projects over 750 kW, it's currently 5 cents a watt. There is also a prevailing wage adder for projects that are paying prevailing wage or using project labor agreements. And there's, of course, a lot of information on that in our program manual. Um, I did want to, uh, so there's a question coming in about the adjustments related to the ITC bonus. Whether the language saying we reserve the right to make adjustments to the ICSA, does that mean reduce? Yes, it does. That's sort of our plain meaning there. That we absolutely want to see all the details of eligibility and the application process and what the requirements are for a project that receives the bonus ITC. But our general intention is that, if the bonus ITC rules are, very similar to or sort of compatible with the ICSA rules, that if a project, we encourage everyone who's eligible to apply for the ICSA. Um, you know, however many months from now, when the bonus ITC applications open up, we encourage everyone who is eligible there to also apply. For those projects that receive, especially the 20% bonus, I think unless we see some unexpected aspects of the tax credits, or we'll definitely be responsive to feedback as well. We'd expect to zero out the ICSA. That seems to be the simplest and most straightforward option. Our analysis indicates that especially that 20% bonus is worth far more than the ICSA. And it's not especially complicated analysis, just like 20% of the tax credit basis of a typical project. So our sort of concept going in here is that all of you will still be very motivated to pursue the ITC, and we definitely want you to. We just want to be able to square that up with the level of state funding being provided. Um, Before I turn this back over to Sarah, I see one more general question. There's a question about when the final DAC designations will be released. Again, Sarah described how we plan to use those final DAC designations for geo eligibility. We expect them to be released in the spring and most likely prior to the ICSA reopening. As I understand from our equity team, over 3,000 comments on the final DACs were received, and they've been very hard at work over the last 4 months reviewing and assessing them. Things certainly aren't in a holding pattern. There's a lot of very intensive work happening on those, but they are on track to be finalized in the spring and to be available for the relaunch of the ICSA. Um, and I guess the last one I'll tackle before I pause is, there was a question about why the different minimum discount level requirements for upstate versus Con Ed. As you saw in the presentation, we'd require 10% for upstate versus 15% for Con Ed. So that 15% in Con Ed is based on our analysis of the 30 cent a watt ICSA that was mandated in the 10 gigawatt order. We've looked at this very carefully. We've looked at some of the data that was provided in the feedback we received last year in the first round. We've now taken into account that a 30% ITC at minimum should be available to all projects. And our result was that the 30 cents a watt ICSA really does justify a minimum customer discount of 15% versus 10%. A lower discount would really be, in our analysis, delivering most of that added benefit, to the project owner versus the customer, which isn't really, of course, the intention. So there's two things to this. Of course, we would appreciate further feedback on that, especially with data, and especially with data that's based on sort of project costs and revenues in the post community credit world. A fair amount of the feedback we received was very oriented on the community credit and the delta between our proposal and what a project could have gotten under the old community credit. We really do want to understand how this looks to projects look moving forward. And then I'll also note, and I appreciate there's some complexity here in the feedback cycles and regulatory piece of it. In our midpoint review that we filed back in January, NYSERDA did request from the commission some flexibility on these on specifically the Con Ed, ICSA, and community adder. That's another venue for comments. I believe the comments are due in early April. So, in kind of that forum or in both forums, it would be useful to hear from some of the Con Edison stakeholders as to whether you would like us to hold off until that cycle is completed, and NYSERDA may then have the option to adjust the community adder in Con Ed to a lower level with a 10% discount. I'm not saying that's our preference or that we plan to do that, but just like it would be an option created if the commission adopted our proposal, and is an alternative that you could certainly provide us feedback on. So with that, I'm going to pause and maybe turn it back over to Sarah, or we may need a little more time to catch up on these questions. Thank you.
Yeah, I can address a couple of the questions that came in, and then I might need some more time. So I think one of the questions that we got was, can you define the door-to-door sales? It sounds like the definition includes cold calling. So for example, if a customer finds us via an ad and gives us their contact information to learn more about the program, do we need to record the subsequent call to prove the customer verbally expressed interest? I think door-to-door sales are just, sales associates or subcontractors in the field, in a neighborhood, walking door to door and signing up customers on the spot. That's really how we're defining door to door. What we're saying for the QA component that's now required is that if a customer is signed up over door to door, it's our understanding that it's an industry practice to call that customer after the fact and to confirm that customer is in fact interested in signing up for community solar and verifying that interest before moving forward with processing their application. The specific situation around cold calling, it's not something we actually thought of. So I think greater detail would be very helpful kind of on that marketing my apologies, on that marketing tactic that's being discussed, but we were specifically talking about door to door in that situation. And I think the person who asked that question also had another question around cold calling, that cold calling a group of people who had not specifically requested that information from a given developer. I don't know what that specific scenario is that is being discussed. So if you can provide more context, that would be helpful. So I think there was a question on what the minimum funding threshold is. So just to reiterate what we said there, if a project is awarded the ICSA, they are going to be funded at a 40 to 60% eligible subscriber target. Every project across the board. Your award letter, what your award letter is going to say is that you're getting awarded at what is essentially that 60% subscriber target. But we are saying 40 to 60 so that, you know, if you, for example, you know, like have your award letter, but you're only able to sign up 45% of the customers, you're not getting penalized for going below the 60%. It's the minimum is 40%, and then the maximum that your award letter will be is 60%. That being said, if you are able to get way more than 60%, 70%, 80%, the way that will work is that that money will be drawn from a separate fund that is not part of your award letter. It's essentially going to be like a fund that everybody has access to. And so that additional money won't be in your award letter, and it's open to everyone. So I hope that answers that question. Uh, Max, did you want to take a minute and talk about the multifamily affordable housing incentive question?
Great. Yes, I will. Thank you, Sarah. And I'll also quickly, because I saw a request for clarification about remote crediting
Yep.
came in. So there's this has no impact on remote crediting is the simplest way to put it. This is a webinar about community solar that serves disadvantaged communities and low and moderate income customers. Remote crediting is separate and not really impacted one way or another by this. So there was a question that came in about the multifamily affordable housing incentive. That's a sort of a special incentive rate for on-site projects that serve regulated affordable housing. However, we've seen a model evolve, with, it seems to be a very beneficial one, where community solar is sited on, say, the rooftop of a regulated affordable housing property, and some or all of the credits generated are either credited to the residents of that building or to other residents of the surrounding community. So the question was, would the ICSA be stackable on top of that existing higher incentive rate? And that may have been a question specific to the Con Ed territory. The answer is no, but there is already a higher multifamily affordable housing incentive rate for projects using that community solar route. That incentive is already quite a bit higher than what would be offered if we just simply stacked the ICSA. So I do think we're sort of calibrating this in the right way for on-site affordable housing. I will also note we kind of didn't get into this level of detail in the main webinar, but our intention is to update the rules for those multifamily affordable housing projects that use community solar. There's some somewhat out-of-date rules around this. We're going to update the rules to say that once the ICSA is released, that in order to qualify for that higher community solar incentive for multifamily affordable housing, that all of the subscribers to that community solar project must be ICSA eligible subscribers. That doesn't mean that the project needs to apply for the ICSA or go through the exact same process as been described here, because that's really for larger community solar projects or community solar projects serving entirely offsite residents. But just what qualifies as a subscriber will follow the same set of rules. And we will be, as we phase that in, we'll be having some specific guidance and materials and conversations just for folks working in that space. But I'll just add to avoid anxiety that an eligible anchor subscriber in that case could include the affordable housing building itself. So it would be totally eligible under our proposed system for affordable housing to site community solar on the roof, 60% of the generation to be dedicated to that affordable housing building, and the other 40% dedicated to the residents or other LMI residents of the community that would fully qualify under our system. Um, and I guess I can hand it back over to Sarah.
Yep, I can take it from there. So we got a comment about how we should represent the arrangement between the primary contractor and the subscription provider. That's really great. Please provide that as specific comments. I will say that the comment that we received isn't at the level of detail that will help us make that decision, but I think that I'm glad that folks are starting to think about that. We have a question about if the ICS, what we mean by reconfigure. So I think the example that's given is that, like, say your customer signs up for the ICSA, they are income eligible, but then, 10 years later they hit the lotto. That's not really what we're talking about here. What we're talking about is, if the original customers that you had when you were signing them up for the original awarding period, if they're mostly still there, that's perfectly fine. It's just any new customers, those are the ones that we're going to be looking at and making sure that the eligibility documentation, or to make sure that they have the income eligibility, or sorry, to make sure that they are also ICSA eligible. That's really what we're looking at here. So we don't want to penalize customers that are doing much better than they did when they signed up for the community solar project. It's really about making sure that keeping the ICSA in mind is an important component of this. So, um, so yeah, thank you for that question. We got another question. Is there an ICSA penalty if a project reconfigures to provide a greater subscriber benefit than was available in the initial years? So I think, essentially what the question is here is if you sign up customers at a 10% rate and you decide you want to increase it at a 15% rate to a 15% bill discount, like, is NYSERDA going to penalize that project? The answer is no. If you're providing a greater customer benefit, we are not going to penalize you for providing a greater customer benefit in terms of a higher bill discount. Let's see. Does the program have any additional requirements for community solars that are owned by municipal governments? I think we're just looking at all projects that want to do the ICSA, regardless of their ownership, just making sure that they are, meeting the requirements as we list them in the program rules. We don't have any specific, you know, considerations depending on who the owner is. So there was a question about workforce development activities. Could I just ask the person who asked that question to restate it? Can an unrelated organization be used or affiliated for the stake of the project or workforce development activities? So if that individual, I just want to make sure I'm getting what you're trying to say correctly. So please answer that question, or please provide more into that question. I think I need a little bit more time to read. I think there was a question, will there be any additional blocks beyond the initial 860 megawatts for upstate? We don't have an answer for that, but we're hoping that the 860 megawatt block is significant for the.
Hey, I'll jump in for a couple.
Great.
A couple more came in about the community adder process, mainly asking how projects that have already received regular NYSERDA incentives, how they what the process will be for them to get the community adder. We'll be reaching out directly to those project contractors about just the logistics of doing that in the portal, and we'll be doing that over the next few weeks. There was a question just about how NYSERDA will know if a project's awarded bonus ITC. We're really going to have to wait for more details from the IRS and Treasury on just the details of how, allocations would be made and so on. But we will require you to tell us. That will be written into the program rules and the contracts. Um, and then there was a question about um, you know, the question was, do you go after the owner or the contractor if a project no longer qualifies for an ICSA project? I'm kind of reading that to mean if, a significant number of years down the line, if a project is found to no longer qualify, are we going to go back to the original contractor? I definitely check out the rules that we sent out. We'll try to make this as clear as possible, but the key thing will be we're going to require that all of those ICSA requirements be transferred to a new owner when a sales is done. So I believe if that occurs and is all done correctly, it would be the kind of current owner in that years down the road scenario who would be responsible and NYSERDA would be interfacing with. Um, just because it happens to be above that, I'll take one that just a comment that the 3-year payment schedule is problematic for project finance. We're certainly aware of that comment. We've certainly heard that and understand that it's not as favorable as a full upfront payment. However, what we've tried to balance here is of course that we want to make sure that these projects are serving the intended market over the long term. We've even at least at the outset a couple of years ago, we looked at 5-year payment schedule, 10-year payment schedules. 3 years seem to be the best balance, not least because there's already a 3-year schedule. Which is really a 2-year schedule. 24 months basically elapse from when the commercial operation payment is made and when the second anniversary payment is made. But that 3-part payment schedule seemed to hit the right balance, though certainly not sort of rejecting the notion that it is not ideal for financing. And Well, I'm talking just cleaning up here that, a question about, I think it's can building owners who want to do CDG but aren't, they're not affordable housing, they're not buildings with LMI customers, can they still do community solar? The answer is absolutely yes. They would likely qualify for the community adder, but not the ICSA. So those, it's just there's just this greater incentive that's available for these LMI projects. So I'll pause for now.
Yep, I can go, Max. Oh, did someone else want to talk?
Yeah, Sarah, this is Luke Forster. Just as a
Hey, Luke.
clarifying point, when we're talking about percent bill discounts, we're talking about the percent of the value stack that the customer keeps as a bill savings. So for instance, in a case where there's a 10% customer discount, if there's $100 worth of Veeder credits each month, the customer sees a $10 bill savings, and the customer's PPA payment to the developer would be $90 a month. That would be a 10% customer bill discount.
Thank you. Thank you, Luke. Um, just gonna try to see. Where I was. Okay, so I think there was a question. Actually, it looks like I don't know if this question's been answered by Max, but I think the question was around like if a who is responsible if a project no longer qualifies for the ICSA? And I think it's really the responsibility for the ICSA rules are transferred to whoever owns the project, is the answer. So if you sell your project to somebody else, it's that asset owner that now bears that responsibility. Let's see. Okay, we got a question around when the ICSA will be opened, when the expected final version will be opened. So after incorporating feedback, we are still hoping for a late spring, early summer launch. That is still the plan. And, you know, of course, that's dependent on how extensive the feedback is, if we have to make any major adjustments based on the feedback what we receive. So that's the current plan, and we don't see that changing, but we'll see what the feedback tells us. There was a question about, it appears from the document that projects that have already acquired customers and or have COD'd are eligible for ICSA round 2. Can you please confirm? Yes, that is still in the rules. So if your project was not part of ICSA round 1 and you essentially have entered completed status since the closing of ICSA round 1 and the start of ICSA round 2, you are able to participate in this new program. We put that in place, because we knew there would be a little bit of a gap, certainly not as long as it's been, between the closing of round 1 and the opening of round 2. And so we wanted to make sure that those projects could still participate. Let's see. There's a question about, oh, sorry, did you want to go?
I just wanted to quickly address a few questions that I would generally summarize as sort of noting that many of the utilities have had a lot of problems with community solar billing and crediting in general that may impact the success of the ICSA. We're certainly very aware of this. Our colleague Allison Elligan is on the webinar, who's working directly with, of course, the industry and DPS and the utilities to try to resolve these issues. So those are uh, those problems very much exist. They still exist. They're still a problem, but we are moving forward with this program and moving forward with trying to solve those problems in parallel.
I can address a couple more questions. We got a quick question if the ICSA and the community adder are stackable. They are stackable. We got another question around the community benefits discount, the community benefits like higher incentive. So this individual wanted to know that projects are not required to provide a greater discount if they can basically provide all of the kind of 5 criteria for community benefits. And they just want to know if the understanding is correct. You are correct that if a project can do all 5 of those criteria, they don't have to provide that 20% discount. However, they still have to provide a 15% discount. So that's just a really important component. And then I also just recommend looking at what's required for the 5 criteria, because there is, quite deep community benefit that needs to be required, including some kind of community ownership structure, some kind of workforce development, direct outreach to like communities that don't have English as their first language. So, we're really just trying to, with the community benefit project, providing additional incentives to projects that are doing much deeper community benefit, whether it is, deeper savings or still pretty deep savings, but then even more kind of in-kind benefits there. I think we had another question about the community benefit project. So I think the question is if project needs to be located within a DAC to qualify for basically the local. There's a requirement for, having the subscribers be local, or can it be located in the adjacent zip code? I think we're pretty clear there about how far away customers need to be to participate in that community benefit, or sorry, for that, for projects to qualify for that community benefit criterion. I can't think of it at the top of my head, but it's quite local. It's quite local. Let's see. I think there's another question for around who can participate in ICSA projects. For kind of that traditional ICSA project, it's just like traditional community solar. So if you have a project in National Grid, it can be subscribers across the National Grid territory, whether they are in Albany or Buffalo or up in the North Country. If it is a community benefit project, one of the criteria for a community benefit project, one of the optional criteria is around, that the customers need to be very local to the actual project. So that's where the distinction is. It's not, um, the localness of a project isn't relevant for general ICSA, but it is important for community benefit projects. Okay, let's see. See. There was a question around would tabling events be considered door-to-door sales? Tabling events would not be considered door-to-door sales. Door-to-door sales. We're really talking about, sales associates that are in a neighborhood walking around doing door knocking. That's considered door-to-door sales. There's a question if long-term subscriber requirements require ongoing verification of income. The verification of income just needs to happen at the time of application. So you don't have to be going back to your customers every year to verify their income. It's just at the time of application. I think we had another question around the timeline for accepting ICSA applications and making awards. I think we will be able to provide greater detail on that, once we launch the program. But we'll make note of that question so that we make sure to address it.
Sarah, I can jump back in for a couple.
Sure.
A question again about the community adder timing. So we're targeting mid-April to reopen that. We'll be reaching out again to contractors that have projects in the pipeline that, meaning that have already received New York Sun incentives and can add the community adder. We'll just be reaching out to you directly about the process. Don't worry if you don't hear from us until early April. We're just, trying to get everything sort of ready within the portal within our system to make that as smooth a process as possible. There's sort of an interesting question here about if projects that receive the ITC bonuses aren't eligible for the ICSA, which types of projects do you anticipate receiving the ICSA since the requirements overlap significantly? That's a great question. It does sort of show the position we're all in here of really not knowing how much the requirements down to the detail level really will overlap because we haven't seen that level of detail from the federal government. Just as a major example, we don't seem to have clarity yet on how benefits for a project to be eligible to receive the bonus ITC will be defined. In terms of just in terms of what we're talking about, like, will there be a percentage discount requirement for community solar projects that are seeking the bonus ITC? What will that be? We don't really know that. So that's sort of why we're needing to leave it so open. I think what we're anticipating just as our ICSA relaunch and then the later in the year release of the bonus ITC application play out will be as I suggested, we sort of anticipate that a lot of upstate community solar projects in the pipeline will apply relatively soon after we reopen the ICSA. That's just based on seeing over a gigawatt of projects in the pipeline that have come in since the last ICSA application was closed. So for those projects, you know, they may apply for and receive the ICSA award. Again, certainly encourage everyone who's eligible to do that. And then, we're expecting those project owners to take a real hard look at the bonus ITC details as they continue to come out. If your project is eligible for that, again, we strongly encourage folks to apply. That seems to be could be a tremendous benefit for projects. How exactly we would then adjust the ICSA, again, we just need to see what the different final requirements are. But completely zeroing out the ICSA for those projects that get that likely much more valuable bonus ITC is a likelihood even, just to prepare people for that. Um, things are of course going to look a little different as we get into the future, and especially as we look at New York City and Con Ed projects, where as that pipeline grows over time, um, we'll just have to see project developers really may see it as more of a fork in the road as to which path they're pursuing. So I don't really have an answer to how that will play out, but I can really commit to working with the person who raised the question and everyone else in the industry and the stakeholders to kind of figure that out and figure out what the kind of right combination of state and federal support will be to meet the policy goals.
Okay, great. I'm getting a lot of questions specifically around kind of like the fifth criterion for community benefit projects. So I'm just going to read it out loud from the program rules. Um, so to qualify for this criterion, a project needs to be sited within a DAC and serve the surrounding community of eligible subscribers, at least 60% of the project capacity. So it's got to be pretty much the entire project maximum that we require for the ICSA. 60% of the project capacity is dedicated to eligible subscribers from that surrounding community. And we are defining the surrounding community as the same or adjacent zip code. I think there was a question of if a portion of a project is located in a DAC, would that qualify for number 5? I don't know at what time that situation would happen. So, if you have a specific situation there, please share it with us. But hopefully my reading of the rules kind of helps all of the questions around criterion number 5. Let's see. Okay. There was a question if the Con Ed community benefit projects are different than upstate. The answer is no. They are the same. Oh, I see now. So the question was around the CDG project is located on the outside of the DAC. That Why don't you put in that specific as a comment right now? That would not qualify for criteria number 5. Let's see. Let's see. Is the 860 megawatt block based on the 60% project capacity, or all 100% of the project capacity? That counts for the 60%. That's the capacity block for projects that would be awarded at the 60% level. There's a question for, are the projects that were already awarded under the earlier part of the program required to follow these new rules, or are they just able to choose or opt into the new rules? They're able to opt into these new rules. So round 1 projects have to abide by round 1 rules, and round 2 projects have to abide by round 2 rules. But if round 1 projects want access to some of the efficiencies of round 2, including geo-eligibility without self-attestation, they would need to opt into the new round 2 rules that we indicated around subscriber makeup, the bonus ITC, door-to-door sales, and I think that was it. There might have been one or two more. Making sure I'm getting these questions. Let's see. So there was a question about which adders are stackable. The community adder is stackable to the ICSA. The multifamily affordable housing incentive is not stackable with the ICSA. I think there's a question about building relationships with LMI communities, specifically around community benefit projects, that the developers might not have those communities, but maybe they can work with folks to have those communities. Really, for a community benefit project, it's really about whoever's developing the project having that close relationship with the community, and that close relationship really starting at the very beginning. So not just reaching out to the community just for acquisition and outreach, but really having them involved with the planning of the project at the very beginning. Let's see. Okay, we answered that question. Okay. If you are having issues accessing the link, email us at the Community Solar inbox, and Dylan or someone else from our team will just send you the proposed the link the link to the email blast from this morning. I think there was a question on I think we got another question on like when awards will be made after the ICSA is released. We will talk about that at the release of the ICSA.
Sarah, if I could just expand on that a little and just
Sure.
sort of yeah, I guess kind of highlight the part of your presentation that talked about the primary application process, which of course is also written out in the document we circulated this morning. Just really encourage people to take a look at that and sort of think through how that change will sort of impact your process. We see that as a major new efficiency that we're introducing in the application process. So, uh, while especially because we have such a huge pipeline that will immediately become eligible once we open this, I suspect we will get a rush of primary applications at the beginning, and there may just to set expectations. Honestly, there may be an initial slowdown as we process that high volume. However, by using the primary application process, we should then be able to move forward with future applications from the same portfolios, the same developers, much more quickly than we have been able to in the past, and offer a much smoother process.
So, Max, I think there's one more question that I can answer, and I think the last couple at the bottom, it's probably better for you to address. The one last question that I see is, can we convert our remote crediting project to CDG? I recommend you talking to, either Jason Mangione if you have a non-res project, or Allison Nelligan if you have a CNI project, but I believe there's a one-time allowance to switch between remote crediting and CDG and vice versa. So actually, Allison, if you just want to confirm that quickly, then maybe people won't bother you about it.
Sure, Sarah. Yes, that is correct. So there is a one-time transfer from a remote crediting project to a CDG project, or vice versa, CDG to remote crediting. So once you make that one-time change, you would not be able to change it back again. We do have specific rules outlined in the program manual regarding a change of a project. So you can go there and see any rules and requirements. We do ask that you notify us prior to COD, and that we also need written confirmation from the utility that they have accepted the change from remote crediting to CDG or CDG to remote crediting.
Great. Thank you, Allison.
I can jump in on those adder questions. One question was, is the brownfield and landfill adder, are those stackable with the ICSA? Yes, they are. Those would just be treated as usual for a project that's also pursuing the ICSA. Thanks for that, asking that detailed question. Another question about the Con Ed community adder. I guess that will be 20 cents a watt. In that case, we're just simply reopening the block where we left off. Uh, and a little bit of an earlier question that I'll just read. It's, if market conditions change so that discounts to electricity are more valuable than the adders, can money be rata refunded and opt out of the program? So I believe I understand the question. The answer is a little different depending on timing. Of course, we want you to apply a project for the ICSA with the full intention of moving forward with that project as an ICSA project. However, in the gap of time between, when you submit your ICSA application and when perhaps the project moves forward to construction, there may be a sale, there may be other considerations such as electricity costs that the question asked about. So simply, canceling your ICSA application, is an option then, and that, contract would be canceled and the money removed. We hope that doesn't happen too often, but, we certainly understand that conditions change. Once a project is operational and subscribers have been signed up, please refer to the program rules draft we released today for how, pro rata sort of clawbacks and recaptures would work. We are really hoping that people don't take that step, and we, in all honesty, like deliberately tried to make it painful for a project to especially throughout, but especially in the early years, essentially drop out of the program. And because that would mean, if I understand correctly, what that would mean in practice is, basically booting subscribers, at the end of an annual cycle, or cutting their discounts in half. That's a pretty bad experience for the customers. That's certainly, not what we want to see for any customers, and certainly not, customers from disadvantaged communities. Please refer to the language that's in the program rules that has a lot of those details, and we'd welcome more feedback on that.
I think that's it for questions. I don't know if you see anything else. I think with that we can close out. Can we just go back to the last slide, or can we just go back a slide? Thank you. So thank you everybody for joining today. We're a couple minutes after 2:30. The proposed rules are now live, and we will be taking feedback starting now until April 11th at 3 p.m. There are 2 ways to provide feedback, which are listed here. They're also listed in the cover page of the proposed rules. And don't hesitate to read through stuff, send us questions, send your feedback. We really appreciate your comments around these proposed designs. So I think with that, I hope everybody is staying warm today. It's cold and snowy here, and have a great rest of your day.